The title is clickbait. Most fields are not bad. However, there are some fields that play better than other fields. I'm Milsim Airsoft, and today I'm going to be talking about field design and structure. This is not a rule book. This is about intentional design. Bad fields aren't usually lazy, they're just unfocused. I've played at fields indoor and outdoor across the country. I've edited thousands of hours of footage from multiple angles, from multiple players on either team, on either sides of a certain field. And this has led me to hold field design to a higher standard than most. And it's one of the first things I look at when attending a field. A good airsoft field isn't realistic, it's one that is intentional. And truthfully, most airsoft fields fail for one reason. They only think about where players can go and not why they would go there. So I really wanted this to be a structured video for you guys, where I really go over point by point what makes a field good and what makes one, not work as well. However, it is pretty difficult to do that. I have a lot of opinions on fields. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things to consider. The rule set for specific event organizers or field or like local fields change how a field plays pretty heavily. So I'm going to be kind of going over some of the main points I think people should be taking a look at and thinking about when doing field design and what you should be thinking about when playing at a field. And kind of using that to flow into this. So as I kind of ramble on about this, I'll try to bring it back and piece together all these pieces so that it's concise and informational and makes sense to you guys. But just know I have a lot of thoughts about this, so I might miss some things. I might go into things a little too heavily that maybe don't matter as much. But these are just my personal opinions on what I think fields can do better in general to make a better playing experience for the player. So the first step, in my opinion, is breaking down what the field is trying to do. And I break that into three categories. That is Milsim, casual, and competitive. Your Milsim field will have a large space where breathing room really matters. Milsims succeed when a game mechanics adapt to reality, not copy it. Real-world locations don't always equal fun gameplay. Consequences do lead to improved gameplay, and that's something we'll talk about a bit later. On the second point, and probably the most common field that you'll run into, is your casual field. That is pretty much anywhere where you can go play open play. That includes paintball fields, airsoft fields, even laser tag to a degree. These are fields you can just go out and play with your buddies any weekend. The game types are usually much shorter than a Milsim game, anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour long for a match. So the field layout changes drastically. These will have similar intentions, but on a much smaller scale. When you have a larger casual field, you can run into issues with sectioning off the field for smaller crowds, which is something we'll get into as well. And then sometimes when you have just an attack-on-attack style of field, you end up running into having no real win conditions, which can cause stalled games. And then lastly, a competition field, one that I don't think needs a lot of explanation. They are highly specialized with precision and performance over immersion. They are designed to assume that refs will be there with timers and strict rules will be in play, so a bit different on that end. Now, once you know what a field is for, then you can design how it plays. So the first thing I think is really important to think about, and something I've already mentioned a few times so far, is intention. Intention means every structure has a reason. Angles are more important than aesthetics. You have to ask yourself, what does this wall force a player to do? And I think that if a field has a lot of intention to it, and the entire every single angle and every structure built has intention, it's kind of hard to fail on a field. Sometimes you do have to take a step back and look at the greater scope of things to really figure out where some of your problems lie. But if you are focusing heavily on intention to begin with, it will have a lot of those problems mitigated from the start. Inspiration. I think that fields that take real-world locations, movies, video games, any sort of media, and adapt it and copy the feel is really cool. However, there is some problems that come up when copying the exact geometry of these things, and that's something I'll talk about more later. However, I do believe that inspiration takes a second step to intention. in just the sense that a field that has a lot of aesthetics and is decorated really well doesn't always play the best, but it is definitely an important part of field design. Something I spoke about a little bit already was player count. We'll go more into it in detail when talking about specific fields. However, team balancing does beat realism. So in real life, you're not always going to have an equal amount of people on either side of any conflict. However, in Airsoft, you kind of need that. There are some use cases where that is not always true. There are certain game modes you can do where it's low numbers versus higher numbers, which is usually, in my experience, attack and defend missions, which a lot of fields aren't built for attack and defend. They're usually built for attack and attack. So just to boil that down, field size versus player density. Too many players can equal stagnation, and too few players can equal dead zones. So stagnation points are something that can kind of arise when nobody wants to push. This is usually caused by long fire lanes, no alternate routes, and no reward for movement. So if there's really no push for you to go and take a long lane or fire movement, you end up with these stagnation points. So now this is more so for smaller fields, but spawn pressure, the distance from action does matter more than the location. Spawn camping is usually a design failure, assuming that there's good team balance. You would rather prioritize protected exits over protected spawns. Now, field difficulty. I think difficulty is really important in an airsoft field. There is a definite difference in an uphill struggle to being trapped. Losing should feel hard, not hopeless, and comebacks should be possible, not guaranteed. What I'm trying to get at is that when you are playing airsoft and you are trying to push out of your spawn and you're having a hard time, it should always feel like we can do this. It might not be easy, but it can be done. If a player ever walks off the field and feels hopeless, like there was nothing they could have done in that match, that is bad field design, or bad team balancing. Assuming the teams are balanced, that's most likely bad field design. Now, to elaborate on difficulty, because I think this is a great comparison to draw with milsims and casual play, right? I think a big step up from casual play to milsim is the, obvious difficulty level, but what does that really mean, right? So some milsim events will be held at airsoft or paintball parks, usually larger outdoor fields. What I'm going to be kind of talking about specifically, though, is when we utilize real-world locations or, mount facilities, training grounds, things like that, areas that are outside of the airsofter's control. And why I think that this can work and not work for airsoft. There are some AOs for milsims that have notoriously not worked out very well. I'll say that, I think a lot about shopping malls and amusement parks that have been airsoft games that have been played in plenty of them, and they're just not built for, obviously for airsoft in mind, but also for, the kind of movement that you would like to see out of an airsoft game. A lot of times they are direct paths, not a lot of crossfire lanes, or a big circle that doesn't really have a lot of movement in between. So using these locations for airsoft can be really cool. They're a lot of fun to go to, and the real world locations are something you might not get to often play airsoft in. So I definitely recommend it, but you'll learn really quickly that as far as airsoft goes, it's really not the best place to play airsoft at. I find a lot of times for milsims, having enough room to really move and do these long ruck movements and have a feeling of, accomplishment when you finally capture a place is really important in a milsim style of game. It is the difference between your casual play and your actual difficult 12-hour, 24-hour, 40-hour games. And that brings a bit more into some of the other field designs we'll talk about later, but having this level of difficulty where it is hard to take a building or hard to move up to a certain place without getting spotted or whatever can really increase some of those game modes and make them a lot better. But at the same time, it can do the adverse and it can make it a lot worse and less fun for players if it is too challenging and too difficult. It should feel like an uphill battle, but it shouldn't feel impossible. Now, following that is information flow. Can players read the field? Do new players understand where danger comes from? Visual clutter can kill decision making. I love aesthetics on a field. I love when it feels real, lived in, things like that. However, too much in field design and aesthetics, painting, lights, things like that, can become overly complicated, especially to new players on your field, and make decision making very difficult. This goes hand in hand with skill compression. A good field will let good players shine without deleting new players. This includes multiple engagement distance, safe routes with slower payoff, high-risk lanes with high reward. This allows newer players who don't feel like risking as much to be able to play slower while still giving experienced players those high-risk, high-reward routes that they can take and play the game in their way. Having a field that adapts to a lot of different player styles is really the best thing, especially for casual airsoft, where you can get new players who it's their first time playing and players who've been playing for 10 years plus. And having a field that can kind of adapt and allow players of all different skill levels to really have fun is crucial, in my opinion. Something that I don't find as important is fatigue and pacing. Constant intensity will burn out players. A field needs low pressure zones and breathing room. Airsoft isn't just physical, it's also mental as well. Part of the reason why I don't necessarily 100% agree with this sentiment, as much as I do think it is important, is because at our own personal amped airsoft arena, it is very high intensity. There's no really breathing rooms, and that is mainly because of the size that we have in this building to even build the field. And I will talk about the amped airsoft arena specifically a little bit later in this video. However, I just wanted to point out that you don't always need this fatigue and pacing space. However, it is something to consider. I do know a lot of newer players and first-time players struggle with that aspect of our field. It is probably the biggest downside of the field, but it's just one of those things that we can't change due to the limitation of the space, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Another really important part of field design that I think is wildly overlooked when creating a field is lighting and sound design. Lighting coming into the field is something that is very important. If you have an indoor field with overhead lights or windows, I think that it is especially crucial to make sure you know where your shadows are being cast. If there is a corner that is supposed to have an advantage for a certain side and a shadow is being cast in the opposite direction, it is going to ruin that advantage. The shadow in lightings is as much as having a mirror somewhere where you can see someone, or a window where you can look right through and see somebody. That shadow is giving away a person behind cover, and it should be intentionally thought about where that light is being cast. Similarly to audio, something that people don't usually think about is how audio affects your gameplay. If you run into a room and it is carpeted and your feet hit the ground and it's very quiet, you unintentionally move faster. You think, they can't hear me, I'm more safe. You feel more relaxed and more confident moving through that space. Whereas if you were to enter a Connex and every step is cascading with echoes through this metal box, and every BB ring is alerting every enemy around that you are inside this Connex, you are immediately less likely to move forward and push at a high speed through that. This typically goes for newer players. It's more of a subconscious thing than an active thing. If you play a lot of airsoft, you usually know I'm gonna push straight through this regardless of the sound my feet is making. But sound design is definitely something to consider at a field, especially one where you have newer players playing at. I know here at the Amped Airsoft Arena, we play music over the loudspeakers to kind of mitigate this sound. However, I've played games out there where we have no music and you can hear the footsteps of everyone walking around, and it creates a completely different atmosphere. So audio and lighting design is important to an airsoft field. As surprising as that might be. So some other things to consider, which we're not going to talk about too much because I don't find them as important as some of the other things I mentioned, but they are still aspects of an airsoft field that go into the design. So the first one being psychological design, the perceived fairness. Players don't need things to be fair. They just need it to feel fair, if that makes sense. Losing because you got outplayed is fine, but losing because there was nothing I could do is not. Another thing is decision density. How often does a player have to make a decision? Push now or wait, left route or right, fight, reposition. These are all things that are decisions that a player should make on a field that should have some sort of meaningful impact on the game. A bad field are ones that have one lane, one fight, one outcome. Good fields have micro decisions, choices that matter but aren't permanent. Another thing that is pretty important is time to contact, the time from spawn to the first engagement. For Milsims, this is very adaptable, but for casuals, not so much. At a casual game, a long walk time back to spawn can ruin a game. However, a lot of times it's necessary for outdoor fields. So kind of figuring out ways that you can make it work with your field where it not feeling as, necessarily bad as doing a giant hike back to spawn is just something to consider. But spawn locations is always going to be something that's going to be slightly a problem when you get to these larger field sizes. So, keeping these key factors in mind, what are the mechanics that make a field good? So fire lanes define where fights happen. Long fire lanes create control and suppression, where short fire lanes create aggression and trades. Every long lane should be avoidable, have limited angles, and have the shooter exposed from somewhere. A common failure is a long fire lane that locks down half the field and has no counterplay. Good design is fire lanes that are powerful, but temporary. Now there's also movement lanes. This defines how a player gets places. Covered movement encourages pushes, exposed movement creates tension. Lanes should intersect, overlap with fire lanes, offer multiple risk levels and rewards. Bad fields force one push, good fields offer a bad option, a risky option, and a smart option. Verticality, or a lack of it. It is a powerful tool in Airsoft. High ground equals vision and safety. It needs limited angles, multiple access points, and clear counters. The problem in Airsoft is that you lack fast vertical movement, which makes vertical mistakes harder to fix. So going up and down stairs, up and down ladders, this is all much more difficult in Airsoft. So these are things that we have to consider when adding in multiple levels of buildings. You need multiple access routes, you need multiple fire lanes inside of those buildings for upstairs. And verticality is something I'll talk about a little more once we get into video game media, because a lot of maps that you see in media forums are often using vertical scaling as part of the map design, which in Airsoft doesn't allow it to translate very well, and we'll talk about that a bit. Now, the last thing I want to say about kind of the overarching field design is mirroring. Symmetry is a tool, not a crutch. Symmetry does not always mean boring, and asymmetry does not always mean unfair. Balance can be achieved in different ways. Mirrored layouts are easier to learn, easier to balance, and they reduce unfair perceptions. Asymmetry creates unique roles, but requires compensation. We'll talk about a perfect example of a mirrored map, which is Nuketown from the game series Call of Duty, a map I'm sure everyone is familiar with. It is one of the cornerstones of Call of Duty. I'll say that in video games as a whole, developers playtest maps endlessly. Maps are designed around movement speed, respawns, information flow, whereas Airsoft lacks a HUD, instant respawns, perfect info. We don't get a pop-up on our screen that says our team took an objective when you play Airsoft. So these things do matter a lot. That is something that, developers are not thinking of when they do video game map design. Therefore, Airsoft maps need more forgiveness, not less. Airsoft fields are often built once, rarely iterated, and problems can get blamed on players. The field's not the design that's bad, it's the players who don't know how to play it right. I often hear that, and I disagree with it, honestly. So before I really talk about video game maps and their design, I do have to address that games assume you are sprinting everywhere, sliding, vaulting, and jumping. In reality, we have slower movement and physical exhaustion. Something that we are all aware of, but sometimes you don't really think about when you look at some of these maps and you think, that'd be really fun to play Airsoft on. So let's talk about it. As I brought up, Nuketown, a nearly symmetrical map, it forces center engagement with great flow with limited depth. The map itself has about 6 movement lanes. So what this means is from either spawn to get to the center of the field where the fight is happening, you have about 6 different ways that you could go. Now, if we were to turn this into an Airsoft field, which places have done, it does exist as an Airsoft field, you are pretty much instantly losing one of those lanes, and that is the lane out of the window outside the building. In Airsoft, you can't jump out of a second-story window, so that's just not gonna happen. So you are then left with 5 lanes of fire. As we probably know, or as you may know from playing the map Nuketown in Call of Duty, it doesn't play all that well. You get shot in the back a lot, you end up running around a lot, you can get spawn trapped sometimes. The actual map design itself isn't necessarily the best, and the main reason for that is its size. If this map was scaled up, much like most Call of Duty maps are, you would have enough room to move through these lanes and not be getting shot in the back constantly. Obviously, because it is a video game and this map allows for instant respawns, it's a lot more fun. But I think most people had the most fun on this map with small numbers and small teams, doing free-for-alls with your friends, stuff of that nature. I think that a map like this is obviously going to be fun in Airsoft because it is something that you've seen in media and you've played in Call of Duty before and you would love to go play it in real life. But that being said, it's not going to be necessarily the best Airsoft field to play at because it wasn't built for that in mind. So both of these things, vertical movement and respawns, do matter. However, you can take a look at how they have designated this kind of center fight area and then the lanes coming from the spawns, and you can take a pretty good idea at how this map is set up and how it can work really well with these lanes of fire intersecting the way that they do. Now, another map that has gone down in history as being one of the best video game maps of all time is Dust 2 in Counter-Strike. Now, Dust 2 uses probably one of my favorite philosophies for a smaller to medium-sized field, which is a 3-lane philosophy. You have 3 lanes that go through your space, and then you have interconnected routes that kind of connect them in a way that allows for movement around these spaces. I'll say that I think Dust 2 is a great example of how not all empty space is bad. A lot of times a field will have a large area and they try to utilize all of that. So where some of these kind of negative space would be in a map, they put a building in that you can enter and there are rooms, and that changes the dynamic entirely. Having a bit of that space to breathe in some of these walkways, it goes right back into what I was talking about with mental exhaustion, having a bit of space to kind of breathe as you're moving through some of these lanes. However, I'll say that this map, as much as I love the design, it wouldn't be great for Airsoft either. The map depends a lot on utility, being able to smoke off a corner to change the dynamic of a route entirely. It depends a lot on verticality, being able to jump up certain blocks to cut through some of these lanes and to get certain advantages on certain sides. These are things that we can't really see in Airsoft, and we can't, program in. So it is another example of a map that has a great layout, but is just not 100% adaptable to Airsoft, much like any video game map is going to be. And finally, I'll kind of get away from some of the more CQB style of field layouts, even though that's probably the easiest to construct and visualize, and we'll talk about more of a larger scope, which is Blood Gulch from Halo. Probably the most iconic Halo map there is. It is a giant box canyon design with 2 bases on either side, which are identical and kind of an asymmetric design. Part of why this map works as well as it does is because of the hills it has in its game design. It allows for multiple engagement distances when coming over these hills. It kind of can give you a really far shot, and then as soon as you get down into a hill, you are no longer a threat from other directions. It utilizes a tunnel on one side of the map and then kind of upper arc on the other side to give it this asymmetrical design that is still even for both sides. I will say that the boost pads they have do a lot for the map design. Obviously in Airsoft we don't have that. I wish we did. I think the way it's built though, it is still very clear that it has that 3-lane philosophy. You have one on the right, one on the left, and one right down the middle. And they all have their own risk and rewards for taking them. So keeping some of these video game examples in mind, let's take a look at what works and what doesn't work with real world Airsoft fields. I'm gonna start with our home field, the Amped Airsoft Arena, one that I've had a lot of time on the field, and I've also worked with Jason a decent amount when doing some different changes to the field and moving walls, and kind of the process we go through when making these changes. So I can say that the Amped Airsoft Arena is a small space with high intention. The biggest downfall that we have is actually the size of the space we're in. It is not a very large field square foot wise, which is why when we built it, we intentionally built it to be hardcore. We know the field causes mental exhaustion. It is constant decision making, it is constant corners turning, there's really no time to pause and rest, and that is by design. The field is small enough that if we left any spaces for rest or breathing, you'd kind of run, you wouldn't get a lot of space to play in. You would get a lot of kind of empty hallways and weird walkways that don't really feel like they're connected to the field. So that is like one of the limitations that we had when building it. Now this is a problem I see across many fields. Some of them have a lot of space, too little space, and they try to work with what they have. So when taking a look at all the things I listed that are important into field design, there are some of them that you're gonna have to drop out. You can't always have every single one, especially depending on your location, especially depending on if you're in a building that's already there. I've seen fields open up in structures that have already existed. I played in a field that was built around a swimming pool. So you had a lane that went all the way around and then a ladder that went down, and then there's structure inside this big pool basin. So this kind of thing is things that we can't change a lot of times when building fields. So just thinking about all the things that I've kind of gone over already and really utilizing those in your field design as best as you can, and really kind of taking what's priority. You know, would you rather like for us, for example, we decided that having a hardcore field with lots of decisions and lots of really intentional angles was more important than having space to breathe and long open movement lanes. That is just a decision we made. Some people like that, some people don't. It all really depends on your personal play style. If you don't like tight, really hardcore CQB, it's gonna be a hard time for you. But vice versa, if you hate outdoor long distances and you love tight CQB, it's gonna be the best thing ever. So it depends on a lot of different things. But as long as it is intentional, I think that it's okay. It's really when a field lacks intention that I have a problem with it. So when Jason goes out and he changes things around on the field, we take a replica out and we look at every single corner we are affecting. If we are moving one wall, we're going to the corners that look at that wall and we are seeing what those line of sights are then. So every single corner, wall, angle, doorway, everything has an intention to it. Everything has how that's going to affect a team's movement and how that's going to affect the other corners and angles around it. It's a lot easier for us to do that in the small space that we have compared to larger fields that have, you know, upwards of 50,000 square feet. It is hard to really think about all those angles. But if you do, I think that a field that really has intention behind every angle, every wall, every doorway is going to be up there with one of the best built fields because you really did spend that time to think about what is going into that play style. Another field that I think is a good one to look at is Ballahack. They are an outdoor field in Virginia. They have intersecting pathways with 3 kind of main routes that I think connect their bottom lower town to their upper town. However, once you get in those areas, it's pretty twisty and turny. I'll say that I have never been there for a force-on-force game, so I won't actually be talking about the field design in the sense of a team on a team. I will be talking about the field design in what I consider a no-faction game. So this is a game where there really aren't any teams, and I think that they do the best example of this, which is Rev, their Rev series, where you are kind of by yourself or with a small group. You can create a team as large as you would like or run solo, and it's kind of like, I don't want to say Battle Royale because it's not, but you know, every man for themselves, a looter shooter, you have respawn zones around, you have ways to revive. There's a lot that they do in these games that is really creative. And I think that their field design benefits that really, really well. They have lots of key locations with roads and intersecting routes and a lot of different ways to go. They have paths that are high reward, high risk, and they have low reward, low risk options as well. And I think that all of this combined makes a field really good. I wish I've played a force-on-force game there before so that I could talk about how it actually works with team on team, but I haven't. But I can say that as a no-faction game, the field layout works really well, which is kind of unique to Ballahack. I've played no-faction style games at other places before, and they oftentimes don't work as well because the field is built for force-on-force. So you end up with lanes that kind of are really built for one team on one team. So when you end up adding a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, you know, 100 teams, 100 individual players on there, you end up going in weird directions, not having a lot of good movement and stuff like that. So like game modes like that, you need to really think about how your field is designed for that. And I think that's something that Ballahack took into consideration when building their field and when introducing that game mode and that game style. And I think they do it really well. So I just wanted to point out that, you know, this As I said, it's not a rule book. There's a lot you can do, and depending on your game's intention and what you want your players to get out of it, your field's going to change drastically. Another big one that I think is worth taking a look at is Gamepod Combat Zone. This is a square field with these spawns on either corner of this square. So what that pretty much means is you're going to end up having 2 lanes. You're going to have your right lane and your left lane as like a corner. And then from there, it splits off into this grid style, which I like because it kind of replicates this town feeling, so it is inspired by real world stuff. But it is also adapted to Airsoft because, as you might realize, playing Airsoft in a lived-in house isn't the best. There's too much stuff, furniture, things. The way the buildings are designed aren't ideal for, playing Airsoft in. So having this facility where they've kind of built it with Airsoft in mind while keeping some realistic aspects from the outside world, they really have kind of brought the two together into a really cool indoor facility. I'll say that, sometimes some of these lanes might feel a little boring just because they are these open street lanes. But I think that as far as the lanes of fire and the lanes of movement go, they were thought out enough that it can play well with these large numbers of players. Which brings me into, I think, one of the bigger concerns that I have with large size fields, which is on a day when the crowd is a bit less than normal, say like 20 players compared to maybe a typical 100 players that you might have, the field's gonna feel very empty. And so a lot of fields, what they'll do is they will kind of section it off, so like a large field can split into 3s or 4s or whatever, and they can run games on smaller fields, and you can have a good play time with your friends without being on a massive open field. And a lot of times this kind of ruins the design structure. The field was built with the intention of being played as a full field, and unless you're building each of those fields intentionally and then intentionally building how they're connecting, it really a lot of times feels a bit not great to play in, is the best way for me to say it. I've played on a lot of fields where we've done 4 teams before, or they just decide to switch the spawns to like weird opposite walls they don't usually do. It's always interesting to try out. I love seeing kind of like the different ways it plays, but it will 100% change the play style of the game just based on where you're spawning. So keeping all that in mind, keeping the size of your field compared to the amount of players in mind is, just as important as the rest of it. And then last but not least, I'm gonna just talk about the Speed QB fields. These are competition fields that are to scale. They have the 4-lane philosophy. They have extremely intentional cover, and their design is mainly around pacing. Pretty straightforward. They are obviously designed for team on team with no really kind of loop arounds. Once you get around, that'd be kind of like end of game if you tagged everyone in the back there. Good fields aren't about realism. They're about player decision making, intent over aesthetics. The best fields teach players how to play them. A good field should punish players for making mistakes without ending games and create choices, not choke points. Player retention is a design problem, not a marketing one. You can advertise all you want, you can run discounts and giveaways, but if new players get farmed, don't understand why they lost, and leave frustrated, they won't come back. A good field makes people feel like they almost figured it out. That's what brings them back next weekend. I think part of what really helps Airsoft grow as a sport is when people give their suggestions and opinions for making fields better, making gameplay better, making game modes better. I implore you to share these, your thoughts and opinions with the field owners, with the refs, with people who have the decision making to make these fields better. I think that the more good fields we have, the more fields that invite new players to play and challenge current players, the more people who will enjoy the sport. So, something I'm passionate about. If you have any questions or just want to chat fields with me, please feel free to reach out to Amped Airsoft. You can reach us here in the comments section, DMs. You can email us at sales@ampedairsoft. But that is all from me, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.